Listen-only mode.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, friends joining the call. I'm with Dr. Anthony Chang, my friend and two-time 10X speaking alumnus, a really smart dude. And I saw him on camera and I said, why am I not surprised that your home is a pristine white? And you replied,
well, this is with two girls running around, you can imagine.
how old are they?
5 and 6.
Wow, okay. Is that a gate?
Yes, it is. But they don't need it anymore. But
Oh, do you have a dog?
I don't.
Is this your way of saying, look, Daddy's on a conference call and please stay out?
Sort of.
Okay, Daddy.
They've known to run around. They're not camera shy at all. So if they had it their way, they would love to just kind of like peek in and make faces.
I can do a quick poll. Friends, you can just leave a comment here. Just say kind of yes or no if you'd like to meet Dr. Chang's offspring. And I'll be the poll here. And if the answer is well, we have one yes so far.
Okay.
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yes. Okay, so maybe at the end of the call, if you can summon the entire Chang family, that will bring it all home.
Sure. That would be great.
I didn't. Do you have slides? Because I know you could talk about this all day and require 0 slides.
Yeah, it sounded like you actually had a slight preference for no slides, so that's what I did. I have no slides. Yeah.
No slides works for me, and I'm sure everybody. I also, in the comments, I left a link there for your recent paper.
Yeah.
Why don't you start and tell us about that for those who haven't had a chance to consume it yet?
Well, I think I have a global health background and just thought it was an interesting juxtaposition to my AI interest now, and wanted to write a paper that would combine the knowledge domains of both of those areas. And plus it was just too good to a situation in terms of the intellectual part. Obviously, it's horrific in terms of the human toll that it's had, but if you have an infusion of data science and artificial intelligence at the level that we have it now for global and public health, it would be, I think, of immense help right now. So, and I think this pandemic really, unfortunately magnified the deficiencies in leveraging available technology in dealing with worldwide pandemics in general. So I wrote about that basically.
You won't find any detractors on this call.
Yeah.
For that positioning. And what can you tell us about where we are with AI development in the continuum of getting us to predicting future pandemics, even though it couldn't save us some time for this one?
Yeah. So one of the things I said was, if you look at battling pandemics as a war, because it is a war against an invisible enemy, not having, I think, sound public health measures is like going to battle without armor, and going into this vicious war with our viral counterparts without leveraging technology and artificial intelligence is like going to war without weapons. So ideally, you'd like to have both armor and weapons, and I feel like various countries have different amounts of, public health strategies that are working well, as well as technologies that work well. And I kind of had intellectual fun grading each country in terms of their performance, not just based on the human toll, but just execution part of it. So
I can feel your energy right now about what you really want to say, and I emphatically likely agree with you.
Yeah.
But due to the bipartisan nature of our phone call, maybe I'll steer you away from any particular political views you may have.
Okay. I don't really have political views in this regard. I just have the view of a clinician with a global health background and a data science background.
That sounds very liberal to me, doctor.
Um, well, I'm not. So I think we just,
we have a PG audience here. This
yeah.
is the forum. Tell us what you think.
Well, I think just about every country could do better, obviously. I think if you look at the countries that have done better than most, first of all, it's interesting that most of those countries are led by women. So there's something to be said about maybe, I don't think it's just by chance, but we'll have to see. But the countries that have done well had a very proactive approach to the public health and global health aspect by very early containment and being very, very detail oriented when it comes to contact tracing and sequestering people that are infected. And I kind of, I guess it is appropriate that we talk about this as a war, but I call that like a skirmish, like a little skirmish that is limited and hopefully lead to a peace talk, and then you avoid a war altogether. So by not doing the containment part appropriately or effectively, I should say, then that leads to exponentially increasing infections across the region, and then you have to execute a mitigation strategy. And I equate that as being in a retreat. So you're not winning the war and you're potentially losing lives, and you have to retreat and rethink about your strategy. So mitigation is more like a retreat in which you're just trying to buy time so that you don't exhaust your resources to lose the war. So mitigation, retreat.
You're busy enough. You certainly don't need to be hanging out on LinkedIn for polls, but I just ran a poll with a group yesterday, and I got 180 votes. The question is poorly worded, but LinkedIn being LinkedIn, I couldn't edit it. It says, do you believe reopening the economy now will result in unnecessary, I should have said additional, COVID-19 deaths? 53% said, yes, I believe reopening the economy now will result in death. So let's wait. 21%, yes, I believe reopening the economy will result in additional death, but let's do it anyhow. And 26% said, no, I don't believe reopening the economy now will result in additional death, so let's reopen. So it's almost 50-50 on open versus close. The part that I don't get, and I left it as a comment, I didn't have a chance to read the comments this morning, is I don't understand the no, I don't believe reopening will have no incremental impact. Because, and this is a very simplistic argument, and I should just shut up and let you talk. Actually, I'm going to shut up and let you talk. Go ahead. I won't tell you why I have an example. Go ahead. What is your thought?
Well, let me just react to your LinkedIn poll there. I'm not surprised it's 50-50 because we're not defining these terms precisely. What does opening the economy mean? Is it going all the way back to what we had before COVID-19 erupted, or is it partial? What's the length of time? In what region? So there's so many variables here that it's not a dichotomy, right? Opening and not opening. So anytime we don't define terms very precisely, then we're going to have a 50-50 result. Just coming from.
I will say, however, in defense of my stupidity, that I made it binary because I thought if I started to say something like reopen in parts with proper PPE and testing, I mean, if you gave enough conjunctions on there, surely there would be a great. But I don't think that's our reality. I think it's kind of binary insofar as do we have tests or don't we? Whatever that state is, here we are. Do we have PPE or not? And worse, and for me, and I apologize to the world who is listening to this call, I don't trust my fellow citizen to behave responsibly.
Okay. So inevitably, we are leading this into a.
I'm sorry. That was me.
But I'm trying to steer away.
Hate mail comes to me, leave him alone.
Yeah. Now, let me just finish the global health discussion because it has a lot of relevance to answering your question.
Please.
So we're way beyond mitigation, even though that's the term that people are still using. We're in suppression strategy. You know, everyone sheltering in, only for essential trips, physical distancing for everyone. Mitigation is more like a retreat. So in terms of, you know, trying to slow down the spread of infection. So by isolating the more vulnerable part of the population, some physical distancing, perhaps closing schools. And it's a spectrum. I totally agree. It's not like, well, technically, are we mitigation or suppression? It's a range of measures, but we're more in the suppression strategy now. But I don't think people want to use that word because in a democracy like the United States, where you practice freedom, suppression seems a little bit too harsh a doctrine. So we call it mitigation, but it's technically more in the suppression strategy. So suppression is a full-out war. That means you have not avoided war when you had the skirmish. You're no longer retreating. It's a full-out frontal war with the virus. And then sort of the last hope we have at some point, and we achieved this with smallpox, is eradication, which I think is equivalent to victory. So we're not likely to have victory with coronavirus because it's a pretty smart dude. It can mutate. It's probably already mutating, which is really unfortunate because, you know, we're trying to find a vaccine and everything, and we're hoping it works. If it's mutating as big RNA viruses do in general, sometimes they mutate unfavorably and just kind of peter out. Other times they can mutate into a more lethal and more contagious form.
Have you ever seen this game Plague?
No.
It taught me a lot about plagues. And you have just enough resources to either develop a drug or contain transmission or fight back a symptom.
Well,
it talks
that's
about
why
fatality and how viral it is, and that's the thing that scares me about this one.
Well, that's why, you know, in coming back to your earlier query about opening and closing the economy or keeping it closed, it's like having a checkers mentality when this is real-time strategy game. You know, there's so many variables and with so many people and behavior in so many regions around the world. It's the ultimate real-time strategy game. So my sort of dream and vision, like perhaps a decade from now, because most of the technology is already available, is that we have during first of all, we wouldn't have pandemics any longer because we'd be a lot smarter about the containment part. But let's say it's a particularly contagious and lethal virus. By the way, SARS-CoV-2 is actually fairly meek compared to some of the other viruses that we potentially could see in the future. You know, with polio, smallpox being so much more contagious. You know, the R0, if your listeners are not familiar with the term, it's basically the reproduction number. How many people can one person infect, can an index person infect?
R0.
And R0,
right.
R0 for this virus initially was thought to be 1.5 to 2, but it's probably 3 to 4 range. We're not counting correctly and we're not testing appropriately. So whereas if you look at some of the viruses that create a lot of mortality, they can be as high as 16. So can you imagine if this had a contagious factor of 16? Every one person gets infected results in 16 people infected. That you talk about exponential. If we're intimidated by the curves we've seen,
I'm right for a moment the first page, and I'd love to get the original of this. It looks a little pixelated, but each of the balls represent numbers of deaths. And as I recall, because it's very small here, this is coronavirus down here. Now, this paper is a month or two old.
Yeah.
I don't know how big the ball would be at this point.
It's going to be bigger. But I think the point is that it could be worse in several ways. One, it could be more contagious, so with a higher R0 number. If you scroll up, Joe, and show our listeners, that's the mechanism. attachment with the ACE2 inhibitor receptor. And then I think I
By
have
the
a
way,
graph.
this is available in the comments section. It's the first link I shared. Where do you want me to go? What page?
Keep going forward. By the way, that's the curve showing you that whatever we do today will take 2 to 3 weeks to see the result. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes a mentality that people don't have, which is they think, oh, okay, everything is kind of chilling. It's time to go back. But whatever you're doing now is not going to result in observable result until 2 or 3 weeks from now. So this is where patience really is huge in terms of looking at the whole situation. Here we go. So that is a really good graph showing on the y-axis is the R naught, or the reproduction number, mm-hmm. and the case fatality ratios on the x-axis. Mm-hmm. So you can see on this graph, it's a little bit incorrect now as we know more about COVID-19. Mm-hmm. It's actually a little bit more contagious, so it's a little bit higher up mm-hmm. on the y-axis. It's more, maybe a little bit closer to chickenpox. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit closer to chickenpox. And the case fatality ratio looks like it's about 1 to 1.5%. So it's a little bit closer to chickenpox.
Okay.
About right there, yeah.
Now, chickenpox is, you only mentioned that I think smallpox is the only disease we've ever completely eradicated.
Correct.
I was having a discussion yesterday with a friend. She's not anti-vax, but she has a compromised immune system, and there are some vaccines that she cannot take. She started the conversation with, if COVID-19 vaccine came out, she would not take it. I was like, why? And she explained why. And I asked her about whether she vaccinated her children. She said her second child had a very negative reaction to a vaccine, so she didn't vaccinate any more children. And I mentioned, again, I'm just like a novice, like anybody else, just reading a little bit of news. And but I recall a few months back where we were talking about a resurgence of measles in the United States, and many scientific figures were lamenting how, come on, people, this is one we actually got right, and we can avoid this, just do the right behaviors.
Right.
And she said, she taught me that the main thing that saw the decline in measles was the purification of water, and that the vaccine didn't come until years later. And she also made the argument that, we say, the flu, when people say, well, COVID is not as bad as the flu, which it has overtaken the flu now, and in much shorter time. But the point she made was, what % of the population do you think is vaccinated against the flu? So your argument's doesn't hold water about how effective the vaccine is. I know I'm taking us off in non-AI directions, but I know these are conversations that you're having, and that you're at CHOC. Now we're hearing about all of these child variants of the illness. Can you talk to us about any of the things I just rambled on about?
Sure. I'll ramble along with you in parallel. Well, let's just finish up the graph here, because I think COVID-19 is going to end up probably on the same height as SARS-CoV-2, which is what the blue dot is close to, but lower on the case fatality ratio, fortunately. Now, you can imagine the worst possible virus will be contagious, right? More contagious, so it's up in that corner, upper right corner, and a lot more lethal. So, because there's a interplay there, right? So if a virus is particularly contagious, that means the case fatality ratio is going to be higher, right? Because you're getting infected faster with a larger number of people. You're going to outpace the medical system in a very, very short time, much faster than what we saw in New York and Rome. And the case fatality ratio is just going to be much higher because you can't possibly take care of all those people all at once. So in a way, there's some interplay between those two axes. But if you're in the upper right corner, which every virus is capable of behaving, then if you think this virus is bad, I think incentive should be on containment, because wait until we get a virus that's particularly bad.
I'd rather not.
In terms of the R naught and the case fatality ratio. And by the way, this is a respiratory virus. Can you imagine if, like in the movies, the Hollywood movies, if the case fatality is manifested by massive bleeding? Can you imagine people bleeding out in the streets, or hemorrhaging, or having some, tremendous epilepsy associated with this virus? So it could be worse. So that's the good news. But the not so good news is, unless we get a lot smarter than this, the virus is going to outsmart us. And I quoted at the beginning of the paper Dr. Anthony Fauci's comment about, we don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. Well, we have to change that mentality. We have to say, no, it's a daunting enemy, but we should make the timeline. And we make the timeline by having smart strategies. So why is it that the entire country is divided in terms of opening or not reopening? It totally depends on what region of the country you're living in, what people are doing, and what your health facility capabilities are. So in other words, we talk about precision medicine a lot, and I think that's one of the valuable dividends that we're going to deliver with artificial intelligence at some point, is that everyone has a different health strategy and medical strategy if you have a disease. But why not apply that principle to global health as well? So if you're in California and you're doing better than expected because, by the way, California hired Blue Dot. I don't know if your listeners have heard of Blue Dot.
Go ahead. Assume that not everyone has.
Yeah, Blue Dot is an AI-based prediction company based out of Toronto, started by an infectious disease doctor, by the way, with a vision that why are we not treating epidemics and pandemics like the weather? So you have all these data coming in, terribly disorganized, but you can organize the data and use some machine learning and figure out ahead of time where epidemics going to spread and how far it's going to go. And he takes in, obviously, all the medical data and literature, but also travel data from all the airlines. Now that the world is interconnected a lot more than when 1918 influenza happened.
So like they're taking saber data?
It's like a database of all this information, and you can extract from that and extrapolate what the curve is going to look like. And Blue Dot is, as well as Health Map from Boston Children's Hospital, were the first to predict this pandemic back in December. They predicted that this was going to hit the U.S. in a big way. Mm-hmm. So if we had that amazing intelligence, I always say artificial intelligence take human intelligence to take advantage of. Mm-hmm. We didn't have the human intelligence or wherewithal to say, okay, that's pretty credible and valuable information. Mm-hmm. We need to really act on that, because otherwise we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives lost in the U.S.
Have you seen
many times more flu? Yeah.
Have you seen the work done by Wharton, their simulation?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
There are quite a few models. There's also the Johns Hopkins model. There's the one of the most accurate models. You'll like this story. Is you may have heard of Avi Shipman. He's the 17-year-old teenager from the state of Washington that's been able to come pretty close to predicting the pandemic spread and mortality for different parts of the country. And I think that's what we need, is every city, every area should have a relative strategy for that particular place. And you yourself should have your own strategy, because everyone's health history is different. If you're a 61-year-old male, obese, with hypertension, then you should have a very different strategy than, well, we don't know any longer because children are affected, than a healthy 5-year-old with, perfect health history. So I think it should be, at some point in this decade, I'm hoping that we will get to what I call precision strategy against the pandemic. But if we do this right, within a decade, we won't see a pandemic of this size we'll just see little outbreaks. So outbreak is like the skirmish. The epidemic is affecting a region, and then pandemic is around the world. And hopefully we won't see a pandemic in the near future, just because we're going to be so incentivized now to get this right. If you think about the dozens of trillions of dollars that's lost from this pandemic, it would have costed just probably dozens of billions of dollars to put in a very good anti-pandemic global health, public health strategy for the US. And obviously you want to involve the rest of the world too, because it's just impossible to shut down travel altogether. So smart money is on preventive measures, which some countries are not very good at. We react in a scramble and a near chaos, and this could have been prevented. I think we had a good containment strategy.
We have a few questions of that nature. Mauro asks, what do you think about Sweden not enforcing stay-at-home regulations? Yet they're not at the top of the list in terms of deaths and infections as a percentage of the population. So perhaps there's something to it, he says.
Yeah, I think they certainly have a higher death total number than the other Scandinavian countries by a long shot. So it's just a matter of
and absolute, actually, you're right. Both
compared to Norway, compared to other Scandinavian countries. So it's yeah, I think it's one approach on the end of the spectrum. You're trying to acquire herd immunity, but I think for most countries, I think the herd immunity can be achieved by an effective vaccination program, and that avoids the human death toll that you have to go through to achieve that. It's sort of like, preventing a war is always smarter than fighting a war. Okay, Sweden can fight the war and win and have acceptable, human lives lost, but maybe the smartest war is not to fight it at all, and it's just to prevent the war by hopefully an improvement in the vaccination program. By the way, I think as a global health person, very proud how fast the development for the vaccination is happening right now. Seems like it's a race for humankind to get to the vaccine. Scientists, including data scientists, are working closer together than ever before. A lot of people just drop their normal research area and scramble onto this. I think perhaps a valuable dividend from this awful journey is how quickly humans came together, because we have a common enemy now. We rarely have a common enemy of this notoriety, and I think it was good that we all banded together. And you see former silos drop. I mean, big companies, tech companies are working together. Can you imagine? I mean, it took a pandemic, but big companies are working together. Scientists are working together.
That's interesting. Last week we had a conversation. Last week's conversation was with intellectual property law.
Yeah.
And the basic question was, what are the intellectual property implications of working on an open source project? And I'm afraid to tell you the answer, because to me, my immature takeaway, it's more sophisticated than this, so there's the caveat, was go ahead at your own peril. Because the guy who owns the intellectual property for real that said, okay, here's the platform, can at any time afterwards say, that was just for a limited time, so now I expect fees. Or worse, I forgot the polite name they gave trolls, patent trolls. What was the well, whatever.
Saprophytes. They feed off of fungi.
Yeah, well, they said that, they could just say, hey, I have 100,000 patents, and one of them here says that you can't do that. I know you were doing it for the public good, and that was fine, but now I'm suing you. And you could go out of business. Non-practicing entities. Thank you, Robert. So that's scary, but that takes us off the topic yet again, and I'm masterful at that. Jonathan has an on-topic question. So we're going to honor Jonathan's question. Jonathan Saul asks, how can PCR IG testing companies help AI companies? And he adds, because data privacy is a challenge. Doctor?
Well, I think it's all kind of converging very quickly. The testing technology, the AI companies that are being in this space, as well as the security companies. So I think a couple possibilities. One is to use blockchain. Another one is to basically you can keep track of people in a tracing program without revealing their identity. So I think, one of the things I love about the US is, even though we don't have good public health infrastructure compared to other countries, is that we're very good at being not just entrepreneurial, but being very clever at, Macgyvering things together and making it work. Probably better than most countries. So
Have they made that an official verb yet? Do you know?
I'm sorry?
Have they made that an official verb, Macgyvering?
I think I just did Macgyvering. I think the French word is bricolage, just putting bits and pieces together and making it work, and then make a business out of it, right? So I think at the end of that white paper, I wrote about my fantasy, my vision, a decade with COVID-19. How are we going to be doing this? And I think, we're going to have daily testing that's non-invasive, that doesn't require, blood. We're going to have that's both PCR as well as antibody testing. And we're going to be basically punching in our personal data, and then the AI is going to, oh, that's the scoring, that might get political.
Yeah, it might. I better scroll quickly past that. But the one that I noticed before, I'm not going to scroll back there, but I noticed that you gave the US a lower grade than China. And I have a couple of questions coming in about China and Wuhan and blame assessment and things like that, and misinformation. That's the question I want to hit after you finish this discussion. It was about PCR and data privacy.
Okay, and I think the testing can be done in a format that's going to secure your privacy, and at the same time, that data can be used to figure out what your strategy for that day is. So we're all anxious to go back to work. I'm anxious to see my patients in the clinic, and I think if there's a non-invasive, relatively non-invasive way I can test myself, and then punch in, my situation, and it will give you back essentially a recipe for what you should be doing that day. Obviously, the basics are going to be there no matter what, mask and social distancing, but perhaps, I can be different in terms of my recipe for what I should do that day, that week, compared to someone in New York City right now, So I think that's going to mitigate, sorry to use the word again, mitigate a lot of the angst that is there now, which is this dichotomous nature of opening and not opening. Mm-hmm. Well, it should be really, really precisely prescribed for you, given who you are, what region you are in, what kind of exposure you're going to be getting, who's traveling, and all of that. So I think by the end of the decade, we'll be very, very smart at this. I'm very optimistic that the US, as they say, we always come in late, but we come in a big way. So I'm hoping that our, technology prowess will make up and neutralize some of the deficiencies we have. And at the same time, I'd like us to, in parallel, start appreciating public health a lot more. That we got into this really bad situation because we simply are underfunding public health and global health measures. And yet we have some of the best known experts from around the world, and in the US in infectious disease and virology, and the CDC is world famous. Countries name their infectious disease section after the CDC. I mean, so we have all this tremendous wealth and human talent, but we don't have the infrastructure to back it up. And hopefully from this horrible lesson, we'll learn that we need to invest in public health infrastructure so that we never have to sacrifice dozens of trillions of dollars and that's not even taking into account the human emotional loss, right? The psychological and emotional loss. I'm sure we're going to be seeing increased mortality and morbidity from the diseases that are not COVID related, because I worry for my patients every day that I can't, see them in clinic and do an echocardiogram and make them a move on to improve their health. The mental health aspects. This is probably the most traumatic experience this country is suffering in this generation. So the mental health aspect, the collateral damage in terms of the other diseases that are not COVID related.
No, I'm with you. It's quite dispiriting.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, one of the most frustrating things is there seems to be no answer. There is no right answer. There's no empirical right answer because, as we were discussing in the group yesterday, and with a friend, she made a number of points that were like, you're right, and she said how, Earth has a way of cleansing the planet from time to time. That was difficult, but okay. And
I'm not totally opposed to that view, by the way. That might surprise you. I'm not totally opposed to that philosophy that we're overpopulating Earth in many ways, and I'm not saying Mother Nature, because we think of Mother Nature as something
like a human,
healthy, positive. It was a cruel gesture from Mother Nature, but we humans can think of something positive in the midst of something horrific, and I think we've seen the positives, right? I think we are no longer going to take a handshake and a hug for granted any longer. We're no longer going to think that time with your family should be taken for granted. As terrible as it was to shelter in, we've all been in the house for two months now. There are some really memorable moments for me with my girls, and I'm sure with your family too.
I treasure more with your family than mine because my boys are ready to get the hell away from dad. That's their lesson learned.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll get to that point at some point. But there are really good moments. We take our daily walks and talk. We did that before, but not every day. So, and the girls want to do it every day. Their favorite moment, just to give you a personal side, is just lying in bed with me and read quietly with me.
That's nice.
And we the busy lives that we live.
I know. I can only imagine how different that is than your usual life.
Yeah, we never did that before. So, yes,
personally, I hoped that a pandemic would encourage my family to play board games with me, but it's going to take even more than a pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I created these humans, to entertain me, and I can't believe. Well, anyhow, this isn't about me.
But I'm a positive thinker, Joe. I respectfully disagree with my fellow Anthony Fauci that vaccine's going to take 2 years. The virus writes a timeline. Well, that's such a self-defeating, mental, I think, aspect of this. I like to think that no, we're smart enough to dictate how this is going to go in the future. We went down in flames this time, but we'll recover and we'll come back smarter and better and faster, and we'll leverage technology. So if you think about, if we just go into the AI aspect a little bit.
Please, what was the point of today's talk?
Viruses is what I call a really, really smart, complex, adaptive system. They kind of behave really amazingly well as a group. They have a singular purpose to replicate. And that's why, in a way, they got very smart this time. They came in a form that you can be infectious without being symptomatic, right? SARS was fairly easy to contain because it was obvious when you're sick from that, and it's easy to find those patients. It's much harder this time with the second cousin to SARS as a virus. You can be asymptomatic and transmit the disease. It takes a long time. It takes 5 to 15 or 20 days. You can shed the virus for a long time.
Are doing the same, right?
Yeah, it's like the virus got smarter. And I know we don't think of viruses as being intelligent, quote unquote, but as a complex adaptive system, they don't need a leader. They just need each subunit needs to do its job and do it well. And somehow they got smarter from the prior version of this virus. It's kind of eerie, but it's and very, very impressive that they kind of got better as a virus to replicate in many more human hosts, and with a much higher number of deaths than SARS. And even though SARS was very well publicized, but it really did not kill, hundreds of thousands of people like it's doing now. So we have to get smarter, because we can't afford not to get smarter about this.
Because I produce so much content, as I know you do, sometimes when I'm having these discussions, I hear a part that's like, if there was a segment to serve as a snippet, you just said it. I mean,
So we can't afford not to be smart about this?
No, just the intelligence of a system that is based solely in replication. And you think about it in Hollywood terms, what would you do?
Yeah.
You would have the most scientific, intellectual, computer-based, and that's your prescription. We need AI. And
yeah, well, I want to borrow my hero Alan Turing's words. You may remember this line from the movie The Imitation Game. And when he's discussing it with the naval commander, he says, well, it might take a machine to fight a machine. It might take a machine, and he ended up building the world's first computer to try to decipher the Enigma machine. And he said the approach that they were having was wrong before. You pit humans against the machine. Machines are just naturally good at many aspects of computation.
Right.
Viruses are like tiny little machines, and maybe it takes AI, something that humans, invented and created, makes our machine against the virus machines, is I think the way of the future, is that it's just going to be automatically eradicated every time the viruses come up with a smarter, complex system, because everything's going to be in place. Humans are not good at being disciplined to do things, as you mentioned earlier. We need something that's automated, that will automatically take care of things, and then we have a chance of, having a way to neutralize the virus, right? So if you got on your iPhone a daily direction, and you have to abide by this, and there's reasonable public policy about it, then it's much easier and accepted. I think then people, with different political agendas, having wavering discussions and recommendations that change. I mean, just locally here in California, it's a mess. We have one of the best curves, in the country. Again, I think partly because we hired Blue Dot and we knew very early that we need to lock down. And then you have local cities that are absolutely, with mayors absolutely against the concept of prolonging the lockdown. So we need some way of addressing the ethos that the U.S. has in terms of individualism and freedom. We need to, I think, temper that with a smarter strategy.
I'd like to build on your Turing analogy. They were in a war. They were already suffering casualties before they said, you know what, we need a machine for a machine.
Yeah.
We're in a war now, and we're suffering casualties, and we're saying it now. And I think the realization of we have got to do something about this, I frankly don't believe we would have had the discipline to do it without something this gross and dramatic.
Yeah.
Because, and at the risk of hearing someone say, no, you're watching this media or that media, I recently saw a story of a news broadcast that had done something back in 2003 about pandemics. And the scientist at the time said, I'm telling you, because this is going to, and you know what? I've been watching that show for years. I probably watched it back in 2003 and thought, okay, there'll be a pandemic. We're going to be.
Probably referring to Dr. Larry Brilliant's talk back in the early 2000s. And Bill Gates, as recently as 5 years ago, gave a beautiful TED talk.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Unfortunately, it was so prescient. It was so prescient. When you look at it now, it feels like he kind of went back from the future to talk to us 5 years ago, and we just weren't listening. And public health and global health are not very
sexy.
not very attractive agendas to pursue when you have many other things to worry about.
And not to mention that there's an economic cost you can measure.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
insurance.
now we learned, that's right. It's exactly right. So now we learned that we have to pay this price to support the infrastructure. And by the way, one of the positives out of this is that some younger generation people that I know, including my own daughter, wants to devote their life to help patients with coronavirus. So we've, it's been a clarion call for nurses, doctors for the future.
Is his daughter 6 or daughter 5?
It's 5. She wants to be a doctor, and then my 6-year-old wants to be a scientist. So, I mean,
okay.
I don't hide
them. I was about to say, at the end of the call, we should only meet the 5-year-old. But since they're both into it.
Yeah. I think this is something they'll be talking about the rest of their lives. Remember, when the coronavirus came and we had to stay in the house, and we talked about how to help people with coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
This is a clarion call, no different than 9/11. I think promoted the idea of, public sector people helping other people, and I think this country is sometimes very obsessed with, sports stars and celebrity stars, and younger generation tend to, have an affinity for that kind of vein. And I'm hoping that, some of the younger generation people will look at this event as, maybe there's something even more gratifying than being in sports or being a celebrity. And that's to help save lives and perhaps even put your own life in danger. And as a cardiologist intensivist, it was, really difficult because I was born in New York. Really, really difficult to say, perhaps I'm not in the best position to go and be on the front line right now to help my fellow New Yorkers. Given my age, and I had recent heart surgery, and my 2 girls, I wish, there's a way I can be there, because, every night on the news, you have this tremendous heartache watching doctors and nurses fighting this battle. It's like, it's no different than you're an injured athlete, you want to be on the field, or you're an injured soldier, you want to be in battle. For those of us in the medical profession, it was very painful to watch other doctors and nurses, sometimes even sacrificing their lives. I think that was the biggest emotional burden throughout this whole process, is not being, helping my own way with many other things, but not being on the front line was very painful.
Can I tell you just a personal note? We've met a couple of times, 3 or 4. You've spoken at my event. This is the most personal time we've ever spent together. I really feel a connection and a deep appreciation. I'm getting notes here about how fascinating this talk is. Profound gratitude. Thank you. More questions than we can address in the time. May I ask, can you, working at CHOC, can you educate us a bit about what has become the top story these last 3 or 4 days about the kids who are dying?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had predicted that it's just going to affect kids maybe at a later stage in a different way. And I was really hoping I was not going to be right about that. What we're seeing is a inflammatory reaction. And you can say probably for a few kids, hopefully it's just a few, that their inflammatory or immune system went into overdrive trying to fight off this virus and wasn't able to regulate itself so that it fights off the virus but not create a lot of collateral damage in the body. And we're seeing a lot of the cases that we're seeing are inflammatory diseases. They call it pediatric multi-system or multi-organ inflammatory syndrome. And it reminds us of a heart condition called Kawasaki disease, which is inflammation of the arteries, but particularly inflammation of the coronary arteries. It'll be interesting to see how many kids actually have affected coronary arteries, which can be lethal. Because if your coronary arteries are inflamed, then it becomes more dilated, and you can actually have clots inside of those arteries and create heart attacks, basically. So fortunately, most of the kids seem like they have this inflammation, but are able to survive after staying in the ICU. And I'm sure we'll be seeing more and more cases. And perhaps the earlier cases were either underappreciated or that this virus, in fact, has mutated to a form that's more lethal for children. Hopefully not the latter, because that would be more troublesome for us in the future. But yeah, we're totally ready to be seeing, children with this disease, and hopefully they will not have as horrific a journey as some of our senior adult patients.
John Hannigan has an AI question for you. Is there an AI method to create a pseudo-randomized controlled study from observational data?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I just got off the phone with someone talking about that. And I think I'd be the first to say, having been trained at, as you know, very, very good places, great mentors, having sat on the NIH Grant Review Committee, I'm a huge advocate for randomized controlled trials. But I do think as we go into the future that we need to, in parallel, respect the randomized controlled trial, but also respect that data science now has a very important role. And I think most clinicians are just starting to see that randomized controlled trials are not going to be the answer for the future in terms of figuring out what to do. And as they say in data science, let the data speak for itself. So I think we need to get more sophisticated, looking at ways of recording accurately, analyzing appropriately, each patient's medical journey, and change the way we look at randomized controlled trials in the sense that we need to, create some data and data science out of every patient's experience so that we can use that knowledge, which we gain from data and information, to help the next patient. And I think we need to do a much better job with that. I think the concept of randomized controlled trials is sound, but it's not going to be adequate if we're going to change a pandemic. Again, it's kind of like playing chess when there's real-time strategy game being played. We need to be a lot more dynamic and a lot more fluid and a lot more open about acquiring medical knowledge using data science than we've ever had before. So in a way, this pandemic has been very eye-opening in terms of, exponentially increasing our gain of knowledge as well as expertise and therapy, because the virus is exponential, right? So the infectivity and the human toll is exponential. You can't fight the virus with a traditional trajectory. You got to bend the curve. So this is not flattening the curve. This is bending the curve to accommodate the virus and its lethality by being exponential in our acquisition of knowledge, as well as our creating solutions to the problem.
I'll tell you, I'm a pretty simple person, and a couple of months from now, when somebody brings up this talk, I will say things like, yeah, Anthony was fantastic, and I left with an impression of hope, and AI is going to do this and that. Today, however, all I can say is, that sounds encouraging, but I have no appreciation for how far along we are. So I know there are smart people working on AI stuff, and it's going to be great, but I have no appreciation for, do we have anything that we're working on right now that's real close that can help us in this moment? Do you have any perception on that?
Well, I have I'm actually doing, I launched a new journal called Intelligence-Based Medicine.
Yes.
By Elsevier. That wasn't meant to be a plug, but just meant to be a segue.
Fred White is with you on that over in the...
Okay, so the first journal that will focus on application and deployment of AI in healthcare and medicine. So it's called Intelligence-Based Medicine. You notice I didn't call it AI in medicine because I happen to think that human intelligence is very, very important. So it's intelligence-based medicine. We're going to have our inaugural issue this fall, and the entire issue is going to be dedicated to AI application and solutions for global pandemics and health crises. So different people are working on different things. For instance, better, more accurate modeling and more precise strategies for individuals, as well as using AI for, yes.
You're entitled to a little plug. You gave us an hour. I'll let you plug at the end of the hour.
Yeah.
But this is
the whole inaugural issue, Joe, is going to be dedicated to how AI is going to be deployed for a health crisis like this. So it's going to take the best of people's work in terms of using machine and deep learning for both diagnostics as well as therapeutics. One of the exciting things is using AI for therapies. So for drug discovery, for protein structure prediction based on genomic sequencing. So it was very impressive that AlphaFold, this AI tool from Google and DeepMind, was able to predict the viral protein structure just knowing the genomic sequence. And that wasn't really possible in such a short time before. So by knowing the protein structure of the virus, then obviously the next development is going to be figuring out antiviral agents that will attack the protein based on, again, sort of in silico predictions of different medications, perhaps medications that's already FDA approved. So I think a lot of it is going to focus on diagnostics, but just as important, some of the AI expertise is going to be deployed for the therapeutic side, developing antiviral agents, developing vaccines. And I think it's not just intelligence and AI, it's all the emerging technologies as well as the whole concept of innovation, right? Mm-hmm. We need to totally bend the curve in terms of your area, device development. We can no longer have months and years as a timeline for devices to be developed. We need days and weeks, not months and years, because the virus has, Fauci's right, the virus does have a timeline, but we can bend the curve of that timeline. We can be in control, but it really takes, it's all hands on deck and everyone, working cohesively. Perhaps that's something we can learn from our viral overlords, is how to be part of a team and without, necessary sort of jockeying for position for leadership. We should just all do our part.
I really enjoyed the term viral overlord, so thank you for that. And having no problem telling the world that I still am too dense to get the essence of your answer. Yours is an exponential answer, and I am a linear thinker. And my simple question to you was, if we have to get to 100 before we've solved this thing, and we're using AI, could you give me a number of, we're still at 5? No, it's really good, we're at 30. No, we're at 70. I know I'm asking a stupid question. There are stupid questions, but I'm interested in your perspective.
If we need to get to 100, I think based on what I've seen and what people are doing, I think we're about a third of the journey there. I mean, to solve the pandemic issue, but that third is predicated on a vast improvement in our public health infrastructure. So it's the armor. So we don't want to fight a war with just weapons without armor.
Yeah,
so that
that's the part where we have to. That's the part where I say we're out of time, folks, because that's the.
Yeah, AI cannot be a panacea for the deficiencies of basic public health infrastructure. So the smartest war is to avoid the war, right? The containment is the skirmish that, and then end up not fighting the war.
Who in your network?
I wrote about this future vision in the paper, how a future quote unquote possible pandemic should be played. And it talks about daily testing in affected area very early on, with the entire world watching very closely.
Emily Smathers asks, does he want to develop the public health infrastructure? The answer is, of course you do, but that's not your role. So I'll add to her question and say, who in your network would you consider to be one of the foremost thinkers in public health policy and influence, and if he or she might be willing to be a future guest for us, because you're absolutely right. And insofar as I can use my reach to spread the word, I want to.
Well, I think the biggest influencers in the global health area are right now
busy.
I think Bill Gates is far ahead of a lot of people. It's impressive how much he knows as a non-clinician that he just picked up working and reading materials. So I think he would be an amazing guest. Dr. Fauci would be an amazing guest.
Yeah, he sure would. If you can get him, just give him a call and let him know to call Joe Hage at my home number.
Okay. But I think I think just focusing on public health is a sound strategy. Focusing on how we can improve our, outbreak strategy and invest serious money. Invest hundreds, if not dozens, of billions of dollars to really make sure that this never happens again, right? So, because the human toll and the economic burden is so bad that it just doesn't make sense not to invest, And remember, Bill Gates in his 2015 talk, I think, predicted that the cost of his strategy, the first thing I would do if I were president or in an influential position, I would just get Bill Gates to be the public health czar for the country, and just say, Bill, go to work, figure out a strategy. He's already figured it out. And it's not even hard. If you think about it, it's not even hard. It's just great containment and precise containment strategy, leveraging technology. In Taiwan and Singapore, they use QR codes and ways and cell phones and ways of deploying simple AI tools and simple technology tools to affect a very good, containment strategy. And that's all you need. And the rest of the population can go on and have fun and sit on the beach and go to restaurants. And it's just utter stupidity that we don't do this. If we don't do this after this, then we deserve what's coming. So
I know, I hate that. I hate that, but it's true. Well, James Blandy says Anthony Chang for president.
Way too intimidating a job.
So two things. One is, I know you're busy and this may be impractical. I'm grateful and see that you signed into our chat room. I suspect many of the people on this call will want to be your bud after this. So if you do have the time and the bandwidth to jump on there every once in a while, I suspect you may have some questions.
I miss talking to people. So of course.
And then last is, I think we agreed in the beginning of this call that we would meet the rest of the Changs. I don't know if that's still on.
Okay. You want to see our COVID-39 healthcare workers and scientists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me call them up. Just give me 1 minute. Lydia, Emma, come upstairs for a minute.
And what great names too, even.
Lydia, Emma.
See that, ladies and gentlemen? He's wearing pants.
Quickly, come up right now.
This would be the time to get your hands together and write notes like, oh my God, that was the best talk ever. I've already had that a half dozen times.
He's your future doctor and future scientist. This is Olivia.
Hi.
She's your future doctor.
You're going to be a
my haircut.
You're going to be a scientist?
And she's the scientist.
Are you 6?
She's 6.
You look like
Olivia
10.
Olivia.
10. And Olivia, you look like you're 8. You guys are very old and very smart.
Yeah, hi, Uncle Joe.
Hi, Uncle Joe.
Can you see me? Okay. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Am I doing this right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was talking to your dad. He says it's time for you guys to play for the next hour.
I'm sorry?
I was saying to the girls, I was talking to your dad, and he
Yeah.
said right after this call, he's going to go to bed with you and read you a story.
And they were pretty quiet, don't you think?
You guys were great. You deserve some playtime.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for lending me your dad. Anthony,
Yeah.
this was great. You were invited to
Fantastic.
every in-person meeting I have for the rest of my life.
Thank you.
Of
Say
course,
goodbye.
the pay will be the same as it was today, however. Sorry.
Oh, well, as I said, this is maybe one of the positive dividends. It's got people closer.
Yeah.
And you don't take every moment that you're in person for granted any longer or on site for something.
Yeah. I just hope I can hug everybody the way I used to.
Yeah, you will be. We will win this war. Don't
Okay.
worry.
All right. I'm a
We get-
hugger. I don't know if you're a hugger, but we're going to hug it out if we are both safe and
We
asymptomatic.
we will be able to do that. We just have to band together like viruses.
My friend Anthony
And-
Chang, ladies and gentlemen.
Well,
Profound
thank you
tip.
very much.
All right. Until next week. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Joe.
Bye.